When Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took office, he promised to end long-term boil water advisories by 2021. So not all water advisories, just ones that have been in place for more than a year.
We are still very confident that we are going to be able to end the long-term boil water advisories across Indigenous communities in this country within the 5 years we set out.
There were 105 long-term advisories when Trudeau came into office. And right now, according to government data, 56 remain. This data excludes the territories and British Columbia. It also doesn't account for situations where a long-term advisory has been lifted, only to have a new short-term advisory issued within weeks or months. Of the 87 long-term advisories the government says it has lifted to date, 33 of those systems have experienced short-term advisories since. The causes of water advisories varies across the country. Everything from where the water comes from, to the pipes underground, to how remote the community is, can impact how vulnerable it is. For example, facilities relying on surface water, such as a river or a lake, have a higher chance of experiencing water advisories due to the fact that rivers and lakes are more prone to contamination.
We pride ourselves on our high sanitary standards, yet we deliberately make open sewers of our waterways.
Each year, the government assesses public water systems on reserves. It looks at the system's design, how well it's being operated and maintained, its record keeping, the quality of the source water, and operators' qualifications. It then combines all those factors to give the system a score between 1 and 10, 10 being extreme risk.
See, I tend to regard a boil water advisory as the most extreme outcome that you can get. The risk scores can tell you about systems that have problems that are not on boil water advisories yet. So it's just another element of information you can use to get a more complete picture.
That's Matt McLaren. He recently analyzed more than a decade of government data on risk scores for the Globe and Mail. What Matt found is that despite the government's progress on eliminating long-term advisories, the national average of risk scores have not changed that much since 2015.
The risk scores are changing a lot more slowly than the number of boil water advisories that are being eliminated. You know, there's a lot of systems across this country on First Nations reserves that are in poor shape that aren't on a boil water advisory, and the risk scores reflect that. So just because a community doesn't have a boil water advisory doesn't mean that they're happy with their level of water service. They may indeed have very serious problems.
The government has committed more than $2 billion towards water and wastewater infrastructure since 2016. And while there has been progress on lifting advisories, water is just one part of Canada's colonial legacy that has disenfranchised Indigenous people in this country.
Since 2015, we have worked incredibly hard to lift long-term boil water advisories across the country in Indigenous communities. We've lifted around 95 of them so far. Many of them had been in place for decades. We recognize there's lots more work to do and numbers more that we need to lift off those long-term advisories. Travel restrictions related to COVID have made it more difficult in certain situations, but we continue to work very closely with communities across the country, with partners. We continue to invest and flow resources so that we can do this. This is a commitment that Canadians expect of this government and one that we expect of ourselves. We will continue to work extremely hard to lift those long-term boil water advisories as soon as possible. As we know, this is a commitment that matters an awful lot to us as a government, but matters even more to Indigenous communities across the country that have gone, in many cases, decades without safe drinking water. We have lifted well over 90 of them so far. Some of them had been in place indeed for decades, and we're working extremely quickly to try and resolve all of them. Understandably, COVID-19 and the travel restrictions have come and created challenges in certain communities and certain paths forward, but we continue to be optimistic we're going to be able to lift those remaining boil water advisories